Bring the meeting back to order again. If we can then move on to agenda item 3. The next item on the agenda is petition 1463 by Sandra Whyte, Marian, Dyer and Lorraine Cleaver on effective thyroid and adrenal testing, diagnosis and treatment. We are joined this morning by the lead petitioner, Lorraine Cleaver, as well as Dr John Midgley. We are also joined this morning by Lane Smith MSP, who is an interest in this petition. Can I welcome you all to the meeting? We have a very... just get started in. We have a very full agenda today, and so I ask that members and witnesses keep their answers succinct. Members will be aware that a lot of information has been gathered in this petition from a range of stakeholders since it was lodged in 2012, and we therefore intend to have a focused discussion this morning. I will allow 5 minutes for either Lorraine Cleaver or Dr Midgley to make an opening statement.
Thank you, Convener. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, good morning. I'll start by a bit of history. Nearly 50 years ago, my wife was a technician at the University of Newcastle upon Tyne and Department of Medicine under Professor Reginald Hall, who at that time was an authority on thyroid function test development and diagnosis. And after a while, she began to feel ill. She was running the test for thyroid stimulating hormone, the first test to be developed in this country. And she started feeling ill. The professor said it was, shall we say, she was doing the test and she felt ill because of suggestion. But after a while, she put her serum sample into the test run, and lo and behold, there she was, TSH up in the sky. She was suffering from Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which ultimately destroyed her thyroid. I was a lecturer in Newcastle University on something else altogether different, but of course, naturally, I became interested in the thyroid and how it worked and how it was treated. And by a series of coincidences later, I got into the position of being able to invent the thyroid function tests, which are now used worldwide for free thyroxine and free iodothyronine. And over the next 40 years, from the late 1970s, I've taken an interest in the development of the testing and treatment and diagnosis of thyroid patients. And I must say that I've become increasingly unhappy about the way in which testing has proceeded. I think that it is unfortunate that the test I have already mentioned, thyroid stimulating hormone, has become an all-overreaching test which is supposed to be successful in diagnosing both the onset of disease, that is under or over function, for which it is perfectly suitable, but it has been extended to the control of treatment, for which it is totally unsuitable. And this unsuitability has led to a significant number of patients being wrongly diagnosed and wrongly treated or not treated at all. So I'd just like to make some general statements to the committee, which I've written down here, I'm afraid, because my memory sometimes I lose it at my age. So I hope to convince you that the current paradigm of thyroid deficiency treatment is insufficient, wasteful of medical time and resource, the wrong test to control treatment are being committed. It commits the sin of categorisation. Now, categorisation, I mean, it puts you, or the diagnosis and treatment is aimed at putting you into the normal range. Now, the normal range is a wide range, and you as individuals each have your individual position in that range, and you might differ. Looking at the number of people here, there'll be somebody, shall we say, very much different from the average. And it's not sufficient just to put somebody in the range, you've got to put them in the range, in the position where their optimum health is to be found. And since you don't know what that value was when they were well, because they were never measured, there's a lot of flailing about going on to find out what the best solution will be. And that's what I mean by the sin of categorisation, just shoehorning people into the normal range and saying, that's okay, job done. And that is wrong. Pardon me. And then the next problem is the promotion of biochemical markers, that the measurement of thyroid hormones in blood, over patient presentation. At the moment, the chemistry dominates the presentation of symptoms by the patient. That's the wrong way around. The presentation of symptoms by the patient should dominate over biochemical parameters, which should be suggestions, indicators, but not dictators of the situation. That is very important. And all this, therefore, has been to the detriment of the health, well-being, and the economic activity of mainly female patients. About 90%, 80 to 90% of thyroid sufferers are female. And therefore, shall we say, us males perhaps are a little less, shall we say, aware of the situation than women are in this respect. Because 1 or 2% of women, at least 2%, have got thyroid problems. And that's quite a significant number when you think of the population. So, in short, I believe there should be an unbiased review of present protocols for treatment and diagnosis in the light of new evidence which shows that the single use of thyroid stimulating hormone as a test for thyroid deficiency and for treatment is an unsuitable and a misleading one. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Can I maybe kick off by asking a bit about the Scottish Government's listening exercise? As you'll be aware, the Scottish Government agreed to conduct a listening exercise, and in doing so commissioned Thyroid UK to conduct a patient survey. You expressed disappointment with the manner in which the Scottish Government approached the listening exercise and its response to the survey. Do you have a view on how the listening exercise could have been conducted differently, and do you have any suggestions in this regard?
Absolutely. Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, my suggestion is what was mooted at the committee a few years ago, which is an inquiry run by the committee, because the listening exercise was an exercise in wasting money, wasting time and achieving zero. I had met with a Scottish Government minister shortly after the listening exercise was agreed upon, and he discussed setting up a sort of short in-house inquiry with medical people, with patients not just from thyroid disease, patients with fibromyalgia or ME, and running a long-term, a year's project. Nothing happened to that, and I know the budget that was set aside for that. Nothing came of it. The Thyroid UK survey was a very small part of the listening exercise. It wasn't the listening exercise. Nothing was done with the findings of the Thyroid UK survey results. In fact, I think they were roundly ignored by the committee, by the Minister that came here. So I think 5 years, almost 4.5, going on for 5 years, we've not achieved anything. We've passed things over to the Scottish Government or to sign, and we've achieved absolutely nothing. And I think an inquiry's got to be seriously considered by the committee. Otherwise, 5 years of work's for nothing.
Okay, Angus MacDonald.
Okay, thanks, Convener. A key issue that's come to light in the committee's consideration of the petition is about the evidence base for patient experience and clinical opinion. Do you consider that there are gaps in the existing research in this area, and if so, what gaps have you identified?
There's a rather stern answer to that. The gaps that are alleged in knowledge are in fact refusal to acknowledge the fact that there is evidence which in fact flies in the face of current actions. Because the medical profession is by definition a conservative one, and having, shall we say, conducted a particular way of diagnosing and treating people for 35 years, is not going to take kindly to being told or indicated that they've been doing the wrong thing for all that time. It will take an enormous amount of pressure to bring them to reading and understanding the rather complicated, and I have to say that, the rather complicated papers which now show that what has been done over the last 35 years or so is suboptimal and has actually caused harm to patients. Now that is a very big thing for the medical profession to have to swallow. But swallow it, one day they will have to do.
And sooner rather than later. Okay.
Brian Whittle.
Good morning. We understand from the Scottish Government's latest submission that the Chief Scientist Officer has the remit to fund clinical research that has led to a Scottish-based clinician or scientist, and that has the potential to improve the health and well-being of people of Scotland. Have you approached any Scottish researchers to make funding applications to the Chief Scientific Officer to address any gaps in clinical evidence that you may have identified?
My great disadvantage is that I'm not medically qualified. And that means that I can be easily ignored because that can be raised against me immediately. I do not have those connections, and nobody from the health service in Scotland has approached me, and indeed nobody in the world has approached me to actually talk in any forum about this situation. So I would say the invitations on my mantelpiece rate to zero and look to be continuing to be zero for the time being. So it really, I believe, is up to the authorities to debate with me the situation, and in some way the appropriate people and I to have a discussion based on current evidence about how to proceed further.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning. I'd like to ask you about the importance of the doctor-patient relationship in identifying suitable treatment and implementing patient-centred care. Do you think patients are sufficiently supported in circumstances where they don't agree with the treatment plan proposed by their GP or endocrinologist? And do you have any recommendations for what steps NHS Scotland could take to support patients finding themselves in those circumstances?
Have we got a day? Right. Yes. My belief is, from what I read of people's experience, is that in general practitioners are woefully ignorant of how to deal with thyroid dysfunction, shall we say, in patients and their treatment. They seem to have become used to what I call computer thinking, where you look into a blue screen where there is advice given to you and you simply follow that advice in a rigid and mechanical fashion. And that means, as I said earlier, that the biochemical numbers which are displayed on that screen from the pathology laboratory seem to become paramount over the appearance of the person in front of you. That is the great, in my opinion, the great error that has been created, that the patient is now subordinate to the chemistry, and that's not right. It cannot be right, because the chemistry is a guide and not a dictator. But I can't leave the fault at the general practitioners, because they only behave in the way they're instructed to behave. I could go on for ages about this, but The individual patient is an anecdote. There they are in front of you. They've got their parameters and they're unique within or without the normal range, depending on how they are. That's one thing. The normal range is obtained for health statistically, and there is a tension between statistics and individuality. The individual is a place within those statistics, but to use the statistics backwards and say that individual is in there and therefore okay, wherever they are, is a complete error. So I'm saying really that the general practitioners are not given the proper method of discriminating the individual from the ranges they are given to place that individual. The individuality of the patient is lost, and therefore misjudgments are continually made as to the success of the treatment. And this applies also, I'm afraid, to endocrinologists who can be just as guilty of the same errors as the general practitioners. So this is a matter of education, in my opinion.
Do you see this going back to training, the clinical training of...
Yes, I think clinical training has to change very, very, very much because there are an awful lot of misapprehensions about how you treat numbers, how you relate them to patient presentation.
Can I say something, Rona? This is the 21st century, NHS. Medicine's going backwards for us, for this patient group, we're going backwards. We used to have pig thyroid, desiccated thyroid that had everything in it. We can't get that now. We're actually going backwards. Now, this paper from an American scientist published in October last year, I'm just going to read you the last paragraph because I find it astonishing that this is happening in the 21st century. Better medications are needed to treat hypothyroidism. Until that day, I urge doctors to change how they talk about it with patients. Doctors should be telling their patients, I'm going to normalise your TSH, but you're going to be at a higher risk for gaining weight, experiencing depression and chronic fatigue. It's also more likely that your cholesterol will go up. Most of these patients will end up on statins and antidepressants. That's what we should be telling our patients. What they're saying is, I'm going to treat you, your TSH, I'm going to reduce your TSH down to it's in a nice part of the range, but you're going to need some statins, some beta blockers, some antidepressants, and gosh knows how many other things. This is outrageous. It's the 21st century. Because they'll do that rather than admit that what they're doing is wrong. They're medicating people with one drug that doesn't suit everyone, and they're medicating you to keep the TSH happy rather than remove your symptoms. So it does go back to training and education, and I think John's correct when he said this will take decades to unravel because the egos of the people who wrote the papers and decided the protocols are not going to easily give up. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's interesting.
Elaine, and then I'll ask Angus to come in.
Thanks, Convener. It's a supplementary on around the sort of GP issue. But first, could I just put on the record, just given what Lorraine said there, that Dr Anthony Toft, who is a Scottish endocrinologist, eminent Scottish endocrinologist, actually said in the BBC recently, he was commenting on the cost of T3, which maybe we can come to, and he was asked whether desiccated thyroid hormone was likely to be used instead, and he said, and I quote, "I suspect that in time that's what will happen." Now, to me that's just tragic, because the people that are not getting it now can't wait. You know, they're going to end up on, they're on depression medicine, they might be suffering fibromyalgia, etc, etc. So I think just in terms of what Lorraine said, it's horrendous that, yeah, it's going to happen in time, but all of the women that are going to suffer in the meantime and be not economically active, many of them, because of it. And the committee have my own story where loads of money was spent testing me from Lyme disease to Addison's to everything else in between, and putting me through a brain scan situation, which must have cost a fortune, heart monitoring, etc, etc. All through that process, I said to every doctor, I've got an underactive thyroid. It's got something to do with that. And after 2 years of a fortune being spent, finally got to Dr Toft, who tested my T3, and I wasn't converting. and I came back to life with a, you know, a small pill. But that 2 years, and I was just determined. How many women are out there that aren't that determined? But what I want to ask, convener, is about GPs. In your paper that I have your private papers, it's talking about that there's not going to be any sign guidance, so we're back to where we started. It says good practice guide for general practice may be a more useful document. I want to ask Lorraine about that, but it goes on to say the GPs say that they're not in a position to comment on unlicensed medication. Now that's desiccated thyroid hormone, which they used to prescribe 35 years ago. So it was unlicensed then as well. So they're not in a position to comment on this, and yet they can prescribe it, and some do, but they do it under the radar, and they do it under the radar because if you look at the position of the late Dr. Skinner, who kept getting hauled up in front of his professional body for doing no harm to his patients, for actually doing good to his patients. So I can't understand how they can say they're not in a position to comment on unlicensed medication. And I would like to ask Dr. Midgley and Lorraine to comment on that in that paper. How can GPs say this?
I think that the behaviour of the opinion formers in thyroid medicine is well, it's verging on disgraceful. They refuse to allow desiccated thyroid to be licensed or used in this country for a very strange reason. And the strange reason is that it doesn't have the right content of thyroid hormones which are appropriate for treatment. Now, I scratch my head on that, because if you give thyroxine only to patients, which is the normal treatment, that's about as unphysiological as you can do. And it's far more unphysiological than giving natural desiccated thyroid, so long as the content of that product is regulated and controlled, which I believe it is according to the pharmacopoeias. So there is no real evidence and no reason not to be quite liberal in the choice of treatments that you offer patients according to their requirements and according to their responses to the treatments. I cannot see why there should be just narrow tramlines of suggestions and recommendations, in the light of the fact that physiology in individuals is so widely defined and so widely corrected when wrong. I simply cannot see this narrow behaviour having any logic in it whatsoever.
Thanks, Convener. Like Elaine Smith, it's the issue of desiccated thyroid that I can't quite get my head around either. We know it's been available in the past, and we know that it's worked. But just for clarification, Lorraine Cleaver just mentioned a minute or two ago that clearly it's unavailable, but I think we took evidence in the past that it is available on the internet from abroad, and presumably people are still buying it from abroad.
It is.
I buy it from abroad, but I live with the fear that I won't be able to source that one day because it's licensed in America and I'm buying it via the Pacific Ocean, some company there, but which is ridiculous. The medical community removed my organ and said I'll put back what we took out, and they're not doing it. They're leaving me to buy medicine on the internet and many thousands of other patients. There's another problem with the T3, which has been investigated, I believe, by the MHRA. There's one manufacturer in the UK for T3. They seem to have a monopoly on price. It's gone from £54 for 28 tablets to 154 now. And although you're not supposed to stop someone's medication due to cost, that is what's happening, and Elaine's been dealing with that also. I can see the position the NHS is in. I mean, some of these patients are costing £300 and odd a month for T3, which is €1 a pack in Turkey or wherever. So we're in the EU. just about still. Why can't we be sourcing this cheaper T3 from there? Why is there one manufacturer? So that's the tiny glimmer of hope that some patients have, that they can access some T3 eventually if their doctor prescribes it, but they're under constant threat of having it removed, and they are having it removed.
Okay, and the desiccated thyroid, is that available abroad at a reasonable price?
Well, the price has increased somewhat, but yeah, it still works out about £50 a month for me. Still cheaper than the T3 that the NHS is getting stitched up over. And I would not grumble about paying that. I have no problem. Most patients don't have a problem about paying it, but they have a fear about accessing it.
Okay, thanks.
I'm just conscious of time, so I think there are quite a lot of other questions possibly that we could ask. It may be that we could give you those questions in writing, because I'm just conscious that there's a very complicated set of issues here, and I don't want to lose the fact that we're right up against the clock at 20 to 12. So I suppose one thing it would be to say that the question of licensing is not really within the remit of the Parliament. That is obviously for elsewhere. I don't know if there's any final questions that people want to ask. Brian?
Just a comment, convener, and perchance I happened to find out through working with this committee that a friend of mine actually has this issue. It's a male, funny enough, and they were having real problems with the T4 until sort of endocrinologist, a consultant, prescribed T3, and with that, the combination of those two, he says has made a huge impact on his life, and I know that's anecdotal evidence, but I got the opportunity to speak to his consultant, and his consultant was saying to me that half consultants believe it one way and half believe the other way, which is really unhelpful. And what that tells me is that we're still in a situation where proper clinical research hasn't been achieved here, and I don't know what the answer to that is, but somehow or other that circle has to be closed.
I think certainly the issue of research is something that we'd want to flag up to the Scottish Government around this whole question. It does feel as if there's an awful lot more to be established. It's not within the power of this committee around licensing, obviously, but we're also interested in the degree of concern people have about the way in which they themselves have been treated. Maurice?
Yes, could I ask Dr. Midgley a question? Do you think clinicians have clear guidance on when to use different types of diagnostic tests?
No. I don't think they're given guidance at all, actually, at the GP level. The dogma is always take the thyroxine, normalise your TSH, thank you, madam or sir, go away, you are properly treated. That's the end of it. And if you feel ill, well, that's something else. You're depressed, or you've got a cold or something, but you haven't got a thyroid problem. I'm afraid the ignorance in that is quite astounding, really. But there is just one thing I'd just like to quickly run over, and that is that the actual instruments used to measure these thyroid hormones from different manufacturers don't give the same answers. So you've got that extra confusion in which the normal range from one manufacturer will be different from the normal range from another manufacturer, and it can be up to 50% difference. I mean, it can be astounding, especially for free T3. It's awful. The standard of actual measurement is as bad as the standard of diagnosis. So how we get on, I do not know.
Because it's slightly a red herring, I think, because GPs can prescribe desiccated thyroid hormone if they want, and when T3 ran out a few years ago when the committee was dealing with this, we couldn't get T3, we were told then to get it from abroad. The GPs were told just to get it wherever they could. So actually, licensing aside, they could, but they're frightened to prescribe it because they'd been hauled in front of their professional body for doing so.
Okay, as I say, there may be some further points we might want to pursue with you at a later stage, but I'm conscious of time. Can I thank you very much for your attendance again today? I think in terms of what we've heard, we had a draft report that we would want to produce, and so that I think we should reflect on the evidence we've got today and any follow-up questions we may have afterwards before we complete that report. Is there anything else that people think we should be doing?
It's a shame that it's such a big issue, and it's just a shame of we have had to round it off. And I'd be interested to know, but I'm not expecting you to answer because we've run out of time, like what your priority would be to improve the situation. I know there's a list of things, but you know, we can maybe explore that in a letter.
Say very quickly in answer to that. Roll everything back, all the problems that we have about the tests being inadequate, the medicine being inadequate, go right back to the source, and the source of the guidance that's handed out to these GPs. This is why we're in this position. Those guidelines were written based on consensus. That's consensus medicine, it's not science. And we should go back to the source and say, why is that acceptable for such a common illness? That all the guidance that's handed down is based on consensus rather than good quality evidence, because you know we're firefighting here when the problem's way back at the source.
Thank you.
Okay.
Just one point, I'm reading here that it's nice guidance, but surely it's the SMC in Scotland that have jurisdiction here. It's not nice.
Well, that's something we can clarify as well. I think it's sign guidance that we would be dealing with, but we'll get all of that clarified in terms of any final conclusions we'd want to come to.
You know, after all the time and everything and being back to stage one with this guidance and the fact that the GPs are not going to take on board, you know, what it says in your report, the GPs are not going to take on board a good practice guide. That's not going to happen. Is there no possibility that the committee could in fact do an inquiry into this, because all that happened in the beginning was a round table, and then that gave more questions than answers, and then the petitioner has been before the committee a few times, but this is a new committee. I think there's only one person on it who's got the experience, the stories that we put together in a hurry, that kind of thing. Is there not any time in your timetable?
Well, it's obviously we're given the opportunity to reflect on our business programme for next year, as all committees do, but what I'm keen to do is that we have this draft report, and then we can draw conclusions from that. And while, yes, members of the committee, not all members of the committee were on in past time, we have read back and reflected on the evidence, and we have to balance the interests of this petitioner against all the other pressures that are on it, but we can rest assured that we will at least be looking at that. Okay, in that case, can I again thank you very much for your attendance, and can we suspend briefly?